Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Susan Sadigova. I'm the director of U.S.-Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of U.S.-Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce, I would like to welcome you to the first U.S.-Azerbaijan Banking and Finance Forum. It's a pleasure to have you all here, so thank you very much for coming. I would like to start by thanking and recognizing the major sponsors and gold sponsors of today's forum, which wouldn't have been possible without their support. These are the two leading regional banks of Azerbaijan. That's International Bank of Azerbaijan and Pasha Bank, the major sponsors, and our gold sponsors are the Boeing Company and GE, General Electric. They have representatives here if you want to meet with them later on. We have an amazing lineup of speakers, and they will be able to give you more information about the country in details. These are the experts in banking and financial industry, economic journalists, representative of international oil companies. But I want to touch briefly upon the Azerbaijan's economy. In the decade from 2000 and 2010, Azerbaijan's economy was one of the most dynamic in the world, and that was possible to the wise stewardship of its oil and gas industry. And it was exactly during this period that we had the astounding 18% GDP increase in some years. And the current recent drop in the oil prices will have some effect on the speed of growth in the short term, but the long-term prospects remain to be strong, especially now that the country is making a concerted effort to diversify its oil and gas diversify its economy by developing the oil and gas industry. Our banking industry has played an important role in this, in the developing oil and gas industry, and they have pledged to play an equally important role in diversifying the economy as well. We are proud of our banking sector, which has been a pillar of the economic strength. The banks has adopted international standards in capitalization, deposit insurance, accounting, and many other areas to ensure its strength and reliability, and continue to adopt additional global standards. Thanks to prudent borrowing and lending, the banking industry suffered less in the economic crisis of 2008 compared to other countries in the region. Now, the recent drops in the price of commodity will have a certain easing and effect in the short term, but again, the long-term prospects continue to be bright. And now our banks have decided to take the banking sector to the next level, to build the cooperation with American financial institutions and banks. And that's really what this conference is all about: finding those opportunities, utilizing them, and taking advantage of them. Much of the information will be provided through the keynote speakers and 3 session panels. I want to take a moment to thank all the speakers, especially those who traveled to New York for this special event, moved their schedule, so thank you very much for being part of this event. I cannot obviously mention the names of all the speakers here, but I want to recognize the keynote speakers who took the traveling here for this event. That's Ambassador of Azerbaijan to the United States, Erin Süleymanov. Chairman of Pasha Bank, Mr. Akhundov, came all the way from Baku. Mr. David Rubenstein of the Carolina Group will be with us shortly. So thank you, and many others. So thank you very much for being here. And I want to close by thanking the staff of the Chamber who worked really hard to make sure everyone is comfortable. So thank you again, everyone, for coming, and I wish you a very productive forum. Thanks.
Our next speaker to deliver opening remarks is Bill Delahunt, co-chairman of the U.S.-Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce. Bill Delahunt is a former member of the U.S. Congress and has represented the state of Massachusetts for 14 years.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to pretty much say what Susan just said, but I'll do it with a Boston accent. And I'm also speaking in behalf of my co-chair, who I'm sure many of you know personally, Reza Basiri. Reza, please stand up so everyone can turn around. It's great working with Reza. And I also want to take the time to acknowledge the major supporters, the Pasha Bank and the International Bank of Azerbaijan, as well as our gold donors, GE and Boeing. You know, as Susan alluded to, the decade was witnessed in Azerbaijan phenomenal growth. I saw the figure of 900%. And it was fueled by pipelines and by new discoveries in terms of energy. But there comes a point in time, and the government has recognized it, where diversification of the economy is an important goal and one that really brings us together here today. Despite that growth, many believe that the economic potential of Azerbaijan is truly untapped, and that there are significant and substantial opportunities for a savvy investor. And I concur in that belief, and I know that in Washington there is a recognition that the assets in Azerbaijan are more than just simply a friendly government, but an educated workforce and other very appealing assets that should attract investment. But as, again, Susan mentioned, it's critical to be able to attract, and I would underscore, American capital, and of course, vice versa as well. So that this forum is an effort to explore the ways to encourage American capital to look at Azerbaijan through a different lens. Opportunities. There are substantial opportunities. And as my involvement in the Chamber of Commerce, I have begun to realize there are many more opportunities than even I expected and anticipated. So investment on both sides will do wonders for both nations in terms of providing the economic engines that provide political stability, particularly in the region of the South Caucasus. So I'm going to conclude by saying that the U.S.-Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce is here to help. The Chamber itself has been in existence for some 2 decades. I think we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. And as I read the history of their accomplishments, it is substantial. But we're here not just simply to sponsor forums or produce initiatives such as this, but to help individual members navigate their way through what may be a different set of challenges. I would suggest that going to the website would be very revealing in terms of what this chamber can do for individual members. So I guess I would conclude by saying, use us. We have a great staff at that chamber. They will be helpful, and they can provide introductions that I believe would be necessary to American investors who may be unfamiliar with Azerbaijan. But please, use us. That's what we're here for. Thank you.
We now invite to the stage H.E. Elin Süleymanov, the ambassador to the Embassy of Azerbaijan in the United States. H.E. Elin Süleymanov has been the ambassador to the United States for over 4 years.
Good morning. Bill, despite my 2 years in Boston area, I still don't have the accent. I apologize. But my accent is confusing enough, so I think it's a good thing. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I am so happy that this event is taking place. There was a lot of preparation. So I want to congratulate especially the co-chairs of the chamber, Reza Vaziri and Congressman Bill Delahunt, of course, for your great work. Thank you very much for your leadership. And of course, Susan and her staff for all the great preparation that they made to make this happen. I also would like to welcome the delegation from Baku, especially the main sponsors, the Pasha Bank led by Farida Hundev. Thank you to the International Bank for being a great sponsor of this event, to the gold sponsors as well. And I would be remiss without mentioning the much better looking colleague of mine, our former ambassador to Canada and to United Kingdom, His Excellency Fahreddin Gurbanov, who is ambassador at large, which is a dream for everybody to become. So, Ambassador, welcome. He is actually much more decent person than people could imagine because he traveled all the way from Azerbaijan just to be with us here. Thank you very much, Ambassador, once again. Susan said in her opening remarks that the experts will say more about the events in Azerbaijan and the Azerbaijani economy. I am not an expert on the Azerbaijani economy, so I would be well advised to keep it short and give it to the folks who actually know what they're talking about. But let me point out a couple of things. Azerbaijan is, as everybody pointed out, is a very dynamically developing economy. The GDP in 2014 was $75 billion. Over the last 10 years, the investment in Azerbaijani economy totaled over $150 billion. It's only in the last 10 years. Over the last 3 years, the main investors were actually domestic investors, not outside, which is also very important. So domestic capacity for investment is growing. Azerbaijan today comprises over 70% of the South Caucasus economy. Let me repeat that. 3 countries of the South Caucasus: Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan accounts for over 70% of the entire economy of the South Caucasus region. I think that's a very telling figure. Mostly FDIs, foreign direct investments, over the last 20 years or so were directed towards energy sector. But you could see today that the situation is changing. There's a great investment in outside energy sector, in banking as well, in construction, in agriculture, in telecom and new technologies. So the opportunities are vast. I can't escape but repeat what Mr. Delahunt said, that you actually have a very, very vast opportunity of untapped resources in Azerbaijan in non-oil and non-energy economy, especially when it comes to areas as agriculture and others. And as some of my friends, including the great expert on the region, Mr. Lally, can acknowledge, we do have some good agriculture food products here in the United States which are actually now delivered to US markets, and you could taste them, which I strongly recommend, by the way. Azerbaijan has been working very closely with the United States. There have been major investments. For instance, the first ever satellite launched by Azerbaijan, which also shows the pioneering nature of Azerbaijani outreach to space, for instance, in the region, is AzerSat. It was made and produced by Orbital Sciences Corporation in Virginia, in Dallas, Virginia. You also have Azerbaijan is increasingly improving its airline fleet. So today, for instance, many Azerbaijan airlines and Silkway Airlines fleet is basically Boeing's and Airbus. Most recently, Azerbaijan ordered additional Boeing aircraft for about $1 billion, last of them were about $1 billion. We're talking about 10,000 jobs in the United States at least, just to service those contracts. That's what we're talking about. Also, of course, this State Oil Fund of Azerbaijan is also one of its key investment is in the area of U.S. bonds and treasuries. So that's also an important indication. But when we look at Azerbaijan, we should not forget that what Azerbaijan also does is leads the region in a way which is unprecedented. Today, Azerbaijan is a key factor of developing energy security of Europe. We did that in the 1990s through Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, and I remember that the chamber played a very instrumental role in that, and thank you, Mr. Veziri, for your leadership in these areas when those things happened. Today, Azerbaijan is a leading proponent of the Southern Gas Corridor, which is the only new supply of natural gas piped to European markets in any foreseeable future. It's a major project, major investment. But in addition to that, that reflects a vision of the Azerbaijani leadership to make sure that we will live in a more prosperous, in a better region. This is not just one project, it's not just pipe, it is the vision for a transformative beginning of a different type of a relationship in our region. Not surprisingly, we spoke yesterday a lot about this actually informally. There is a great opportunity along the new, what we call a new Silk Road. Today, Azerbaijan built the largest port on the Caspian, that's a port in Alat, and opens up opportunities to Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway to connect between China and other Asian countries into European railway network system, which will shorten the traffic significantly. So we're talking about a new development. Just think about the opportunities which exist there. None of this happens by accident. This is a reflection of a vision and a strong leadership by Azerbaijani leaders. Late President of Azerbaijan, Heydar Aliyev, founded this vision when he began working on the Azerbaijani energy strategy, because he knew it would not stop only on energy, it would expand further into different multiplication areas. Today, President Ilham Aliyev has managed to develop and lead Azerbaijan to difficult times at times, and bring Azerbaijan to become one of the most stable and prosperous countries in the region. And I think that itself, this coincidence of strong leadership, Azerbaijani resources, and a vision for the future, is what defines Azerbaijan today. As we speak here today, I hope that we'll be able to address some of the issues which people are facing, that people are discussing about Azerbaijan. There's so much information on the market, but much of it is not always true. So it's very important that we hear firsthand information from our friends, from our colleagues, from experts, and see what is true about Azerbaijan, what is not, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, frustrations, successes. I think that's very important for all of us. Now, I want to point out something which is, once again, very important, that Azerbaijan is a regional leader. It's interesting that the Pasha Bank has a branch in Georgia, by the way. And let me give you an anecdote. I was recently with Pasha Bank at Sibos in Boston, and the only bank from Georgia represented there was Pasha, Georgia, which is very interesting. That's very telling, but that's a good thing. This is especially telling because today is the day of Georgian independence, so congratulations to our colleagues if any Georgians are here. And the day after tomorrow is, of course, the 97th anniversary of the establishment of the first democratic republic with a predominantly Muslim population. That is the Republic of Azerbaijan. We will celebrate our Republic Day on May 28th. That's a very significant occasion for all of us. So congratulations to all of us as we mark this significant milestone in our history. And I'm very happy to report that just today, President Barack Obama sent a letter of congratulations to President Aliyev, which is a very warm, very nice letter, emphasizing both the opportunities and the successes of Azerbaijan. So I'm happy to report that we have a strong partnership. It is not without its frustrations, but it has mostly its successes and a great future to look up to. So good luck with this forum. Congratulations to everybody, and I look forward to hearing the debates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Next on stage, please welcome Farid Akhundov, the chairman of Pasha Bank. Farid Akhundov joined Pasha Bank in 2007 as chairman of the executive board. And thanks to his commitment, Pasha Bank is now one of the largest and leading banks in the region.
Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my utmost pleasure to be here to speak to this audience. I represent a private bank in Azerbaijan. As a banker, the major role for banks is to facilitate relations, to facilitate trade flows between countries. Azerbaijan, as Ambassador Suleimanov mentioned, Azerbaijan has gone a long way in developing relations, in attracting FDIs, and in growing, in developing its country. We have seen a lot of development in the field of oil, energy, and it is an interesting time in the history of Azerbaijan when the country has undertaken a lot of effort and is strategically now involved in diversifying away from the non-oil sector and from oil sector and developing its non-oil sector. The reason why we as a bank are here is basically we see a lot of opportunities, a lot of potential for growth of bilateral relations between Azerbaijan and US in the field of non-oil sector. We have been preparing for the event. We have been very grateful to the US Chamber of Commerce for arranging such type of forum, and I have a great hope that this forum will become, it is a first forum, but will become a tradition going forward. When preparing for this forum, I have given a hard task to my research department in the bank to find actually trade flows, what's happening in terms of bilateral relations between Azerbaijan and US. And to my surprise, there was a lot of trade flows in oil sector. Almost 99% of exports from Azerbaijan to US are oil, crude oil, and there was exports of non-oil sector. There were less than 10 million in US dollar terms. So I actually very much wanted I have asked my colleagues to find out exactly who these brave people were exporting to US of non-oil products. The potential is huge. Azerbaijan has traditionally been a supplier of agri products to neighboring countries. There was a lot supplied to, in Soviet times, to Russia, Kazakhstan, and other countries in the region. I think US is underrepresented in Azerbaijan in the non-oil sector, and I see it as an opportunity. As a bank, as a private bank, as a commercial bank, we would like to develop relations between US and Azerbaijani companies. We see the potential. We see a lot of demand for know-how and technology in the field of agri, in the field of logistics, transportation, warehousing, and many other fields. And the list is quite strong. So our purpose is to try to explain during panels today, to exchange views, to tell about Azerbaijan, to tell about current developments in the country, and try to address certain misperceptions, may I say, which exist. So you have an experience here in front of you I have been working in Azerbaijan for over 20 years in the banking field. I worked as area compliance officer for HSBC Bank Azerbaijan in Azerbaijan for 9 years. So you have knowledge and experience to address your questions too, and I will be pleased and happy to answer and to provide some answers, as I know. My colleagues representing other banks in Azerbaijan are also here, so we will be happy to assist in better understanding of Azerbaijan, better understanding of the banking sector in Azerbaijan, current development there, and please, as Mr. Delahunt said about U.S. Chamber of Commerce, use us. I would like to use the same phrase, use us and ask your questions. We will be happy and pleased to provide as much information as we know. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next, please welcome Zubayd Ahmed, Vice Chairman, Institutional Clients Group from Citigroup, will be our next speaker. Zubayd Ahmed serves as a senior client banker in the Central Asian region and is also head of Citi's global practice, sovereign wealth funds, has an extensive knowledge of the region.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a pleasure to be representing Citi at the first annual U.S.-Azerbaijan Finance and Banking Forum. I also want to thank Susan and the U.S.-American Chamber of Commerce, as well as the organizers and sponsors for this event on Azerbaijan. I have had the privilege of working in the Central Asian region since the mid-90s, and I think one of the most important points to emphasize, and I think it's been mentioned before, is that the transformation has been tremendous in the last 20, 25 years in this region, and often sitting in the US and other parts of the world, we have a tendency to compare these countries with countries who have been around the block for 200, 250 years. And I think when you compare it with any sense of metrics in terms of what has been accomplished in terms of expanding the economies in this region, it's been tremendous. And Azerbaijan certainly is one of those shining examples. And I think part of the purpose of this, and we do this all the time as Citigroup, who have been working in the country for now 22 years, to make sure that we are promoting the positive developments that the country has been able to accomplish, and also to obviously promote the significant opportunities for further expansion of the economy from a base which obviously was a very important base, similar to Kazakhstan, which historically was a big producer in grain, but when independence happened, everyone focused on things that could be monetized the quickest, which was the oil and gas and the mining sector. And similarly, Azerbaijan used its key competitive advantage at that time, which was the energy sector, to really create the economic growth that has happened over the last 20 years, and now is in a position to really use that platform to expand the economy into other parts of the region. In other sectors, I meant. Citi, as I mentioned, we have been working in the country for 22 years. We have had the pleasure of working with a number of both government as well as private sector institutions to bring these companies to the international syndicated loan markets, private placements, Islamic finance, the Euro commercial paper market, and then beyond that, a slew of products and services, including cash management, trade finance, export agency finance. We have been working closely with the likes of OPIC and Exim in supporting some of the sales of US equipment to the airlines and satellite launches that we just talked about. Perhaps most significantly, last year, 2014, saw the first ever debut international debt offerings by two entities in in Azerbaijan. The first one was the Republic of Azerbaijan itself, which, by the way, a lot of people don't know this in terms of the Caucasus region. Azerbaijan is the only country that has the benefit of having an investment grade rating. A lot of people don't know that, and obviously we will talk about why it has been able to accomplish that. But Citi was one of the lead managers to bring the Republic of Azerbaijan in March of 2014. in a highly successful offering. We raised $1.25 billion at a coupon of 4.75% or a yield of 5%. It was a 10-year issue, and it happened despite all the geopolitical concerns at that time in terms of Russia and Ukraine. Finance Minister Sharifov led the team, including a institutional investor presentation in New York, which was extremely well received in terms of what the country has been able to accomplish. We had a book, of $3.2 billion from over 150 institutions, so extremely successful offering. Following that, in June of 2014, we led a $500 million issue for the International Bank of Azerbaijan. That was a 5-year issue, and it was done at 5.625% yield. Again, in that case, the order book was over $1 billion. So I think both of these financings indicated the interest of international institutional investors who are obviously looking at a broad number of opportunities that they have to invest in. And I think the fact that Azerbaijan, both the government as well as IBA, were able to tap these markets at such strong rates was indicative of all the things that you have been hearing. I'm going to try not to repeat some of the things that have already been said, but I was asked to kind of present the international bank's perspective on Azerbaijan. Clearly, the success of these offerings and the interest of international investors has been driven by the significant economic growth that the country has benefited from. As we mentioned, GDP has grown from less than 10 billion in 2005 to over 75 billion prior to the devaluation, obviously, in 2014. That has been driven, as we mentioned, by obviously a sustained period of high oil prices, but at the same time, benefits of balance of payments, surpluses, as well as very prudent fiscal and monetary policies. And that's one of the reasons why during the global financial crisis, and this was a huge topic of positive perspective on the country by the international investors, is that the government debt is one of the lowest in the region and frankly around the globe at about 12% of GDP. And the banking sector in Azerbaijan also went through the global financial crisis with flying colors, with very small levels of non-performing loans, as opposed to, for comparison, in Kazakhstan, which had a much more difficult issue in terms of non-performing loans. Obviously, we have touched on the recent devaluation, which has been driven primarily by the significant reduction in oil prices, but at the same time, declining oil production in Azerbaijan, which will hopefully recover with the launch of the Shah Deniz 2 gas discovery in 2019. But it hasn't been as much driven, again, in terms of the news. Maybe it's Russia, Ukraine, because the trade with Russia is not that significant as compared to some of the neighboring countries. It's really been the oil prices. And again, it has obviously been a surprise to many people in the marketplace. But again, compared to what the country has been able to achieve, and the platform it has as compared to many other countries out there which are also energy producers who are being impacted much more significantly, Azerbaijan is in a much stronger position to work through this. And the government has obviously already taken a number of steps in terms of cost reductions. The Central Bank of Azerbaijan came out immediately providing liquidity in the marketplace by reducing the reserve requirement from 2% to 0.5%. And in the banking sector, which we will touch on and some of the panels, it has a lot of participants. It will probably see the beginnings of some consolidation, which will be good for the market, and we are already beginning to see that. As we look forward on Azerbaijan, clearly a strong piece, there is a vision which is called Azerbaijan 2020 Initiative, which is really focused on diversifying the economy that some of the other keynote speakers have touched on. The three overarching objectives of that diversification are increasing per capita, the nominal per capita GDP from $7,500 in 2014 to $13,000 per capita, really focusing on growth in the non-energy sector of about 7% a year, which would allow the non-energy sector to reach 60% of the GDP. Again, some of the sectors that are the focus of this were mentioned. Clearly, manufacturing is going to be a big driver. As part of the development plans, the government is in the process of building a very large oil, gas, and petrochemical complex. for extraction, production, and refining of oil, gas, and petrochemical products. In addition, there are a number of other projects on the docket, including fertilizer plants, shipyards that the ambassador mentioned, cement works, steel factories. Construction obviously has been a big component of the diversification into the non-oil economy. That will continue, not just in the energy sector with the construction of some of the pipelines, the Trans-Anatolian pipeline and the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, which will be driven over the next 5 to 10 years, but also a number of local commercial and residential projects. Again, agriculture, by the way, Azerbaijan has, I believe, 9 out of the 11 climates in the globe in one country, which is actually quite important not only for farming, but also tourism, which I think is a highly underexploited part of the economy. It has grown quite a bit in the last 4 or 5 years in terms of the number of people coming into Azerbaijan. Obviously, the European Games, which are starting in a couple of weeks, are going to hopefully be a big marketing promotion for Azerbaijan, but the fact that now Azerbaijan Airlines is flying directly from JFK to Baku will not only create more of a flow of tourism, but frankly speaking, Baku has the ability over the long run to become a hub in that region for passenger traffic connecting from Baku into other parts of Central Asia or South Asia. So in summary, we are extremely bullish on the growth of Azerbaijan. As someone else mentioned, one of the fundamental underpinnings of that potential is the education and the educated population. Obviously, that has been a hallmark of the country, but it's a big focus to continue pushing on that. Introduction of new industries and technologies in Azerbaijan has been a big focus. Clearly, one of the big components of helping facilitate a spirit of entrepreneurialism as well as driving these sectors will be the expansion of the banking sector. Again, we will talk about it. I mean, in comparison, even though there are lots of banks in Azerbaijan, in terms of the role of the banking sector in terms of the service economy is still lower than some of the neighboring countries, so more can be done. I will close in also talking about some of the broader economic developments that have been happening in the region. I spent a lot of time in China. We have all been reading about the formation of a new bank called the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is very focused on promoting infrastructure projects in all of Asia, which would, of course, include the Central Asian region. In addition to that Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, perhaps not as well known is the launch of a new fund called the Silk Road Fund by the government of China, which has 40 billion that has been put up to really create road and railroad infrastructure in the region. And we are already beginning to see the impact of that in some of the neighboring countries. For example, there is a new railroad route that has been developed from Western China through Urumqi in China, through a new pass that has been created at the border of China and Kazakhstan called the Kyrgyz Pass, which will over time become one of the biggest dry dock facilities in that region. And through that, through Kazakhstan, Russia, Poland, and Germany. So the first train that went on this route, having to change the containers because of 3 different rail gauges during that time, reached from Western China to Duisburg, Germany in 15 days, right? Which is a significant reduction in terms of the ocean route, which would take from Western China to Europe of 55 days. Now, in the near term, the cost of that route, the rail route, is a little higher because products are going from Western China into Europe, but the railroad cars were coming back empty. On some of the more recent cargoes, both Mercedes and BMW have actually put cars coming back into China, which is going to begin to reduce that cost of transportation significantly. And the goal is to take that 15-day down to 10 days. KZT, which is Kazakh Tamir Zolit, KTZ, which is the national railroad company in Kazakhstan, has a massive program to develop this railroad infrastructure, which would potentially connect countries like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, which have been totally landlocked. And of course, the mention of the port on the Caspian in Azerbaijan. If we just start imagining, how trade can be facilitated by these new infrastructure projects, which are, in the process of being built, I think we start looking at the opportunities as being limitless in terms of the trade flows, not just out of this region, but from Azerbaijan. And the concept with a lot of countries like Azerbaijan, one of the most important things is how do you develop other comparative advantages to trade with other nations. And part of the challenge with many countries that we deal with is the size of the local population. Azerbaijan has 9 million people. But if you imagine all of these new infrastructure, transportation hubs being built, the size of the whole market becomes much larger. And using Azerbaijan as a base to really support and feed some of these other markets totally changes the dynamics and the profitability of the investment. With that, I'm going to stop. Obviously, we'll be on other panels and happy to share any other perspectives throughout the course of the day. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. The next speaker, Faik Makhmanov, is Chief Representative, International Bank of Azerbaijan's New York office. Faik Makhmanov brings the wealth of experience in representing the International Bank of Azerbaijan in New York, as well as Azerbaijan at the board of the IMF and the World Bank in Washington, D.C.
Mr. Ambassadors, distinguished guests, good morning. On behalf of International Bank of Azerbaijan, I would like to welcome all for the first US-Azerbaijan Banking and Finance Forum. Special thanks to the USCC board and the USCC staff for organizing this event. I'm very pleased to see our colleagues from other banks in Azerbaijan, as well as our partner banks from the US banking community, whose vision and support has helped to broaden international financial sector involvement and investments in economic diversification. I would like to highlight the critical importance of New York capital markets for IBA. IBA's nearly used $1 billion in bonds and syndicated loans in the last year alone. New York and London have become critical capital raising centers, key for Azerbaijan bonds in general. This includes SOCAR recent third dollar bond issue for $1 billion announced recently. Azerbaijan first sovereign bond of more than $1 billion in March last year, and IBA's first Eurobond issue in 2014. Nearly 80% of certain Azerbaijan debt financing comes through New York markets or London, which provides about 60% of capital raising in others. While market confidence in Azerbaijan growing oil and gas sector continues to support growth and sovereign ratings, there are other sectors which are generating promise. Non-oil sector is becoming a priority for national development to protect from future oil market shocks. IBA has a long history of relationships with U.S. financial institutions, both government agencies such as the U.S. Exim Bank, and obviously with large U.S. banks. The transactions go back to many years before, with the first co-lending to purchase Boeing aircrafts for the national airline company. Later, in projects in the agricultural sector, co-financed with the U.S. Exim support. All this has contributed to sector turnaround and restructuring and further development. We look forward to US-Azerbaijan continued strong cooperation in energy security fields, and we look also forward to expand it into other areas such as banking and finance, which is the topic of today's forum, investments, non-oil investments, and expanding trade. Thank you very much, and look forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mamadov. Our last keynote speaker, David Rubenstein, is one of the 3 co-founders of the Carlyle Group. He is also a well-known philanthropist and the private equities shop chief fundraiser.
Thank you very much. What I'd like to talk about this morning is the confluence of 2 trends in private equity. Let me try to explain. Today, the emerging markets are roughly 85% of the world's population. And they are, depending on how you measure, either 57% of the world's GDP if you measure it by purchase price parity, or about 40% if you measure it by GDP. But they are growing. And no doubt in our lifetime, the emerging markets, so-called, will not only have a little bit more than 85% of the world's population, but even by GDP accounting, there will be more than 50% of the world's GDP. Yet, in the private equity world, the emerging markets are relatively small. Today, about 17% of all the dollars invested in private equity go into the emerging markets. In other words, you've got 85% of the population of the world, and depending on how you measure, between 40 and 50-some% of the world's GDP, but only 17% of the private equity dollars are getting invested in the emerging markets. And in turn, also, of all the money being invested in private equity around the world, only about 20% is coming from the emerging markets. But those trends are changing and coming together. What you're now seeing is more and more money is coming into the emerging markets, dramatically so, particularly those emerging markets which have had relatively little penetration yet from private equity. And you're also seeing the emerging markets which have sovereign wealth funds increasingly saying that we can't invest this money in our own country, we need to invest it outside. And so these 2 trends are resulting in more and more money getting invested in the emerging markets by countries and organizations that are not based in those emerging markets, and more money is getting invested from these emerging markets outside of the emerging markets. So these trends are likely to continue. So if you are somebody that invests in emerging markets, what are the biggest trends you're seeing right now? Well, the biggest trends in emerging market investing is that increasingly you're seeing the local organizations become more and more significant. Historically, emerging market investments was appealing to people outside of an emerging market because people outside of an emerging market would see less penetration by private equity organizations. They would see high growth rates, young populations, governments without a lot of debt and other physical burdens, and you would see the prospect of very high rates of return. The theory on emerging market investments is you're going to get a higher rate of return because there's less competition, prices are lower, higher growth rates, GDP growth rates, younger populations, more people in the workforce, less government burdens, and so forth. And that is probably true, though you should recognize that overall, it's not necessarily the case that you get a higher rate of return in emerging markets. Over the last 10 or 20 years or so, the statistics show that you probably get on average about the same rate of return in the emerging markets as you get in the developed markets. And if that's the case, you might say, why would you invest if you're an outsider to a particular emerging market? Why would you, if you're based in the United States or Europe, invest in emerging markets? Well, diversification is one reason. And of course, if you get in early enough, you might be one of the few organizations that can exceed the average rate of return in an emerging market. But on average, you're probably likely to get a rate of return in emerging market investing as you're probably going to get in developed market investment. But now you're seeing more and more people focused on emerging markets which haven't yet had a lot of private equity investing. such as Azerbaijan. And so increasingly what you're going to see is more and more global firms beginning to invest in Azerbaijan and other countries like that. But what you also will see is more indigenous groups developing themselves to invest in their own market. And that is actually a good thing, because when local groups develop, it helps the global firms because they have more people in the country talking about private equity investing, more people are familiar with it, and also politically it helps when local groups are based there are doing private equity investing. Now the question is also raised, why should somebody in an emerging market invest outside? If the growth rates are so good in that market and there's less penetration, there's great opportunities, why should somebody in, let's say, Azerbaijan invest outside? Well, typically you don't have in a sovereign wealth fund often the expertise to do the investing in private equity within a country. Also, there may not be enough opportunities to take up all the capital that sovereign wealth fund might have. And so increasingly you're seeing a lot of the sovereign wealth funds that are growing quite exponentially in size, some in the Middle East and some in Asia, taking more and more of their capital and putting it outside of their own country. So I think these two trends are not necessarily inconsistent, the trend of more and more money going into the emerging markets and more money from the emerging markets being invested outside, because these have different purposes. In the end, I think when people invest in the emerging markets, they should recognize that emerging market investments are not easy. You typically have fewer managers that have the qualifications to run companies you might invest in. You often have higher due diligence issues, you have more accounting problems, you have more difficulty in exiting, you have more financing problems. But all that said, if you are early in a particular country and you have the expertise and you have the experience to do investing and you can add value, you can make a fair amount of money in countries, particularly where there isn't a high penetration rate in private equity. Now, in the United States and Europe, there's a high penetration rate, so there's a lot of private equity investors and there's a lot of competition. Prices tend to be higher. In some of the emerging markets where there's not that much competition, you tend to find lower prices and therefore greater opportunities to get high rates of return. I suspect over the next year or two, what you're likely to see is more and more people who are in energy-related emerging markets investing more and more of their own money outside of the country, particularly let's say Azerbaijan or other countries, as they want to diversify away from an oil-based economy. And so you're seeing in other countries in the Middle East and parts of Asia where there's a lot of oil or energy resources, more and more of the money is getting invested outside as a way to diversify. And I think that's probably an intelligent thing to do. Also, you're seeing a lot of large global firms that are looking for the next great emerging market opportunity, going to countries which have very small penetration rates. Places like sub-Saharan Africa is a good example of that. There are very small amounts of private equity there, and you're seeing more and more money going into there. Places like Azerbaijan or Kazakhstan, relatively small amounts of money have gone into private equity from global firms, and therefore I think you'll see more and more of that. Question is raised, well, is private equity really worth all the aggravation factor often associated with it? Because it takes a long time to make these investments. They are very complicated. Is this a good thing to do? Well, I think it does, if you know what you're doing, you can get pretty good rates of return. Over the 10, 20, 30 years or so of private equity investing in the West, we've seen very, very good rates of return. And now we see pretty good rates of return in the emerging markets as well. I think it's not for the faint of heart. You need to have a lot of experience. You need to know what you're doing. But if you are well qualified, you have the experience, you have the resources, you can add value to companies and find things to invest in that are worth adding value to and likely to get the good rates of return. What are those rates of return? Well, when private equity first started, people were getting rates of return of 40% per annum. Then obviously more people came in, rates of return went down because prices were bid up. But I think today, somebody who invests in private equity around the world is going to be pretty comfortable with rates of return of, I would say, net internal rates of return of 15, 16, 17%. Below what you might have seen 10 or 15 years ago because prices are higher, there's more competition, and so forth. But still, when you think about it, a net internal rate of return of 15, 16, or 17% is still pretty good. Now, in the emerging markets, there's often a belief that you can get much higher rates of return than that because prices are lower, growth rates are higher, and so forth. In some countries, you might be able to do that for some periods of time, but over a 5- and 10-year period of time, which I think is the best way to look at it, rates of return are probably going to drift into the same range as the developed markets. There may be some exceptions from time to time, but I suspect rates of return in the high teens would be pretty attractive for most people. I think in the case of Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan is a place where there is relatively little global private equity money now invested there, and there is relatively little money coming out of Azerbaijan to invest in global private equity outside of Azerbaijan. So there's an opportunity. And I think those organizations which have focused on good emerging market opportunities are likely to put more and more money and attention to Azerbaijan. Prices are less high than they were because oil prices are down, so assets are more affordable in Azerbaijan than they were before. But I also think people in Azerbaijan or a sovereign wealth fund will find more and more opportunities to diversify by going outside of Azerbaijan. Today, the private equity world is in one which is in reasonably good health around the world. Prices are pretty high, and as a result of that, aren't that many deals getting done right now, but there's a lot of returns coming back to investors because prices are high, a lot of exits are occurring. In 2014, a greater number of exits occurred in private equity around the world than any year in history. Today, the fundraising for private equity is going up, and deals, while they've been flat for a while, they now seem to be picking up a bit. So I think the environment is pretty good. In the United States, I think a lot of organizations that are global private equity investors that are based here or in Western Europe are increasingly looking for opportunities outside of the United States and outside of Western Europe, the so-called developed markets, and they are looking to places that are relatively small, unknown, in markets that might have been called frontier markets, but can also be called emerging markets, Azerbaijan being one of them. So in our own case, my organization is one which is a global private equity firm. It tends to invest all over the world. We have funds to invest virtually in any country, particularly in energy areas. We have a lot of global funds for that and a lot of international funds. And so we are increasingly looking at emerging markets we hadn't looked at before. The key to doing well in an emerging market when you're coming from outside is, one, have local professionals on the ground. Two, have local partners who you team up with. Three, be prepared to accept minority status. You can't get control of companies. Four, make sure you have done very thorough due diligence. Make sure you understand the accounting and the history of the company. Five, make sure you understand what your exit opportunities are, when you're going to have a chance to exit, when you're going to have a chance to realize your gain. And six, make certain that all the kind of incidental issues related to due diligence have been done so that no surprises, no probable legal issues that might arise. If you do that and you're well experienced in what you're doing, you've got good people, you can get pretty good rates of return in relatively smaller emerging markets. And I think our firm has become the largest private equity investor in the world in the emerging markets. We now have a large percentage of our workforce in the emerging markets around the world, and I suspect that will probably continue. So let me just conclude there. I think I've finished my time and say that I do believe that the emerging market world for private equity is increasing. It's increasing in two phases. One, people are investing more and more in the emerging markets, particularly smaller countries that haven't yet gotten attention. And many of these smaller countries, like Azerbaijan, are increasingly taking some of their sovereign wealth money and diversifying and putting it into global private equity around the rest of the world. And I think those two trends are not inconsistent, and I think you'll see more and more of that occurring. Thank you.